Sensationally silver, because you are.
Welcome, everyone, to Sensationally Silver, A State of Mind, conversations with extraordinary, ordinary persons of age, people who are going to bring you information, inspiration, and validation. Join us. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sensationally Silver, A State of Mind, conversations with extraordinary, ordinary persons of age. And my guest today, in my opinion, is very, very extraordinary. She's been my guest before, Grace Bubulka, and she talked with us before about her near-death experience, which is how I met her. She was giving a talk about that, and I was so impressed that I asked her to be my guest. Today, we're going to be talking about another dimension of who Grace is. She's lots of different, I don't want to say people, she's one person, but wears lots of hats and has lots of dimensions to her. So this part about her childhood, her story, her mother, I want her to share that with us. So welcome, Grace. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you.
And I want to hear about how you came to write a book about your mother's experiences, because I know you did. Ida's Secrets. That's the title. And you know, we're all fascinated by secrets, aren't we? We want to know what's that secret. So tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, your introduction about calling me extraordinary, I actually like the ordinary part of your introduction because in a way, my stories are shared by so many different people. So I just want to say that this is a very common experience in a sense. My book is called Ida's Secrets, and after I wrote it, let's see, I'm taking a quick peek here. It's 400 and some pages long. At first I thought, what kind of title do I put there? Because I wanted to understand this woman, my mother, who was Ida. And I thought, okay, understanding Ida. And then I thought, who cares? People don't know who Ida is. They may not be interested. But Robin, as you mentioned, you say secrets and people want to know, oh, what's the secret? I think a lot of us have secrets. We have things in our backgrounds and stories that we want to tell in part. And writing this book for me was incredibly therapeutic, rewarding, calming, and I did not even come across the title of the word generational trauma until I started hearing some podcasts talking about it, and I thought to myself, yeah, that's what I'm writing about. So people will say, well, what's your book about? And I can tell them it's about my mother, and it's historical fiction, and but it's really about generational trauma. I had one lady at my church the other day say, I just read your book. It's so good, but parts of it were so hard to read. And she said, it's historical fiction, so you made it all up, right, Grace? And I said, no, Marcia, it really happened. And she said, well, it's fiction. And I said, it's a true story based on my mother's life. And it's not a textbook. I'm not writing word for word what happened on a given day. It's what happened in her life, what it meant for her, and how it snowballed from one generation to the next about our lives together.
And that's what happens, isn't it? It does snowball. I like that way of saying it.
Yeah.
I like to say that life is self-correcting. And in my view, only my view, nobody else has to buy this, but it is kind of like an avalanche. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger until there's enough pressure to turn it around through some kind of healing. My field's addiction. You see that in addiction all the time. It starts going, it gets bigger and bigger and harder and faster and faster. And then sometimes the very healing from addiction is built right into all the awful things that are happening. It's like you got to stop or die, one or the other. So that's that life is self-correcting. And I think with generational secrets, trauma, whatever, that happens too. There's an accretion of trauma that gets big enough that someone has to say, I got to look at this. I've got to explore this. And maybe I have to learn to forgive it. I have to get to the other side of it. And I know that that can turn it into a tremendous gift. I know how hard your book is to read. I had a very hard time with many parts of it, but it was so well done, Grace, and so important. So let's hear about it. Let's hear the story.
Well, I think before I started writing this story, I did finish a book about my near-death experience, which was a turning point in my life. And it made me start looking and examining my life many years after the experience itself. But the book, Ida's Secrets, began in part in the early 2000s. So when you think about it, I was writing this book for a quarter of a century. You know, it's been a long time coming. And I wrote it in parts, and I wrote it to myself, little snippets of my life with my mother, until the point at which my mother said, "You're a good writer. Well, I want you to write a book about me." And I said, "Really?" And she said, "I want everybody to know all about my life and how tough I had it." I said, "Okay, Mom." And I'll read you a little bit from the prologue here, just a few lines. It says, "The book you are about to read was not my idea. I wrote it because my mother insisted. Raised as an obedient daughter, a good Catholic, and not wanting to break the fifth commandment of honoring one's mother and father, here is her story." So she was the one that really gave me the kick to, the impetus to start putting this all together. My friend also asked me, she said, "Did your mother see what you wrote?" And I said, "She saw parts of it." There was one part where she was very upset at a church picnic where she was in her 80s at the time. And another lady at the church was, in my mother's opinion, hitting on my dad. You know, she was, and she cursed her out and had this terrible run-in at the church picnic. And I showed my mother that chapter, and she said, "That's right. That's what happened, and I want everybody to know about it." So part of the book was me writing to myself. The other part of it was my mother's sense of needing to tell her story, needing to share with others that life was hard for her. And as I was writing it, I'm thinking, I'm not only writing about generational trauma, I'm writing about the plight of the immigrant. I'm writing about women's rights. I'm writing about mental illness. I'm writing about poverty. I'm writing about abuse. I'm writing about addiction. So how do you push all of that together? And you really can't push it. The book just unfolded, and it had so many different components that the best, Robin, that I could call it was generational trauma. My mother's mother, if I went back, if I were able to go back even further, I'm sure I would have found more, and how it affected her, and how she decided on what was going to work in her life, what was going to make life better for her, how she was going to survive. And then that morphed into my personal responsibility of, okay, what am I going to do about this? How am I going to survive? So I think it touches on so many different aspects of her life that I just felt compelled to share.
You know, your depiction of the immigrant experience, to use your phrase, was so powerful and so impactful. It's hard to look at how terribly, terribly difficult that was. Just the pressures, the poverty, the fear of not enough, whether it was food or just having just barely enough to survive. You know, it's one thing to kind of have it treated in a fictional way, but when you know you're reading someone's story, this is what happened in this person's life. It's wrenching, absolutely wrenching. And you did such a good job of being so honest about it.
I think
so many of us, my generation, we have that in our background, parents, grandparents who had that immigrant experience and came here with almost less than nothing, just came off a boat, didn't even know if they would be allowed to stay, and had to start from less than scratch, just nothing going for them, and then try to survive with a lot of other people doing the same thing. Oh my gosh. It's hard for, I'm a Southern California person. I've had a pretty easy life. And I think about how far from my own experience that was. I didn't grow up with money. We were always scared about having enough, but it was nothing like what you described, Grace, nothing.
Yeah, but as I listen to you, I agree, Robin. And I would say it's a contemporary story as well. There are people today, you read it in the newspapers, you see it in the neighborhood of people coming from different countries that are fighting to make a living and living with fear and disease and poverty and looking over their shoulders, not knowing who to trust. The level of distrust in an immigrant family of anyone, the social worker that was trying to help my parents and my parents' parents were highly distrusted. And I can understand that through my roots as I read the news today and as I see my neighbors' fear and concerns. It's just like a broken record. It's an historical story, and it's a story for today, I believe.
I agree with you. And it sensitizes us to what is going on around us.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to look. Sometimes it's
Mm-hmm.
very painful to look. But yes, it's ongoing. It's part of the human condition. We aren't all living at the same level of peace and security and having enough. Yeah. So tell us about the generational healing, because that's where the hope is, Grace, to me. Your mother did. I mean, she did survive. She survived with a vengeance. And I know she must have been very proud of the fact that she survived in spite of so many factors that she fought and that she felt fought her. But that affected you in all kinds of ways, of course, just like we're all affected by our parents.
I'm glancing down to look at a little list of things I just started writing down about generational trauma, and I put it into two big buckets: what doesn't work and what works for me. And what did not work at all was denial, like saying, okay, well, it's no big deal. People have it rough, and I, so what? It's over. In fact, my mother used to tell her psychiatrist how angry she was because he kept wanting to know why her mother hanged herself, and she kept saying, "That doesn't matter. That you're here to take care of me." So she would deny some horrific events in her life. What doesn't work is shame, tucking it away and hiding it because you feel dirty. It makes you feel not clean, like you have this garbage of history. Guilt. I wrote down guilt. I feel guilty. Why did I not do something about the situation. As I was younger, it took me eons, it took me decades to come to peace about all of this. Hiding does not work because it's always there. And external solutions like escaping, like moving or trying to control the situation, addictions, projections, all of those for me did not work. But what did work, I wrote this down, was facing the pain, um, accepting my life stages and wisdom, and then having a creative outlook to find a place for it. Because in my different life stages, I remember as a teenager being so mad at my mother, saying, she can get over this, she can control it. When you're a teenager, you think you're invincible, and you look at your mother who's catatonic and going through all of these horrible stages of severe mental illness that they didn't even have a name for back then. And I think she can snap out of it. And and I have to forgive myself for even thinking like that. She was only doing what she could. Um, and then it took me into my adult years thinking, well, if I just let her be and live my life, everything will be fine. And that's slipping back into denial. It's not facing it. And it wasn't Robin until she was in her 70s, and now I'm about 75 tomorrow. And I remember thinking, you know, she is a survivor. She is determined. She had principles. She wanted a better life. And I started to look at my mother as a person, not just a series of horrible events in my life. And I only wish, if I were to go back, that I had had some of the wisdom that it took me years to develop at this point. Because earlier in life, as a child, you don't know what the heck's going on. As a teenager, it's just goes against what should be right in the world when you're, figuring out your own identity. And then when you're in your working years, it's hard to relate to, until all of a sudden you start to say, oh, she was 40 once. Her mother was 40 once. What made her mother do what she did at that age? How did they find a way of making it through their traumas? And again, when I go back 2 generations, my grandmother ended her life, because she had no hope. It was over for her. So my mother, from that lesson, became a survivor, and she fought, um, much to the breakdown of her mind. Um, and I'm just thankful for the last decades of her life that I got to know her and understand her and her secrets.
So you had healing while she was still here. You had
Yeah,
changed the tenor of your relationship before she died, right?
yeah, it was amazing. The last, I would say, 10 years of her life. She died when she turned 90. She said, Grace, never turn 90. That's when her health really failed. But in the last 10 years of her life, she was like an open spigot, just telling all of these stories. And I kept thinking, is this for real? And what she was telling me was resonating with what relatives had told me, with what her customers, she was a hairdresser, what her customers, her friends, um, cousins, everybody was validating some of the things that she was telling me. And at the time, it seemed so outlandish, but it all made sense. So so I got to really, to the best of my ability, understand and learn from my mother in the last 10 years of her long life.
So her own survival, once upon a time, as did yours as a young person, depended on some denial. I mean, she was helpless, and then she saw what her mother did with hopelessness, and she just put all the things she didn't want to look at aside and carried on as best she could. And when she had the freedom to look at it, she was brave enough to do that and to bring you into the secrets and let you know what this history was in a lot of detail after all that time of keeping it buried. Just, I mean, I think about even my mother's generation, you know, the difference between, for instance, with her being divorced and what divorce is like now. It was so shameful then, so shameful. And her mother was divorced twice. So her own shame about her mother was tremendous. This was way back. I mean, my grandmother was born in the 1800s, late 1800s, but 1800s, different values. So the things that were kept secret because you didn't want the neighbors to know, you didn't want to be looked down on and disapproved of because of what was true for you. Those things change. And sometimes that gives us freedom. Sometimes the secrets have so much power that we can't open them up. We never open that book. So what a credit to your mother that she was able to do that in her later life.
Yeah, and she was divorced, and that was one of her many secrets. But the other thing, you know, earlier when I was saying what doesn't work, is my mother was doing all of those things. She actually left Philadelphia to remake herself in Connecticut into a newly married socialite with a higher class living. She formed an entirely new identity until the point where her mother hanged herself, and she had to come back and face the neighborhood and face the gossips and face her shame and her disappointments in life. So it was like trying to escape a bad situation and having it meet you there saying, guess what? You're going to have to deal with this. So it was almost as though the components of life just all came together and said, no, Ida, you're not escaping. You know, here it is, dirt and all. This was this is why you felt guilty. This is why you felt shame. This is the life and the identity that you were trying to bury and hide. And then she found a strength to fight that for many years and overcame many things. But the other thing I think when she came back fighting is it hurt her mental health. It was too much. And I think it was not until her later years when she didn't have her beauty shop and she didn't have to deal with other people as much and she didn't have to raise children. It's almost like old age became a bit of freedom for her. As she got older, she got better. And a part of that was, I think, life just starting to maybe get a little easier on her.
Grace, I had the best conversation with my mother. Actually, it was the only really good one I ever had with her, not long before she died. And it was just a few sentences. But it was such a resolution. So it doesn't matter. You know, if we get there, finally, it reminds me of that parable where Jesus is talking about the people who come to work in the vineyard. And he regards all the ones the same, whether they came early in the day and worked all day long or at the very end. And that didn't used to make any sense to me, but now it does. Time doesn't matter. What matters is the shift, what the result is. And I'm so grateful that my mother and I had this few little number of sentences. I mean, I said to her, I was just ready to leave. I knew she was dying, but she was still doing well. And I turned around and I came back into the room and I said, Mother, we never did very well, did we? And I expected to be blasted because that's what would happen. And she just paused and she said, no, we never did. And then there was another big long pause. And I said, I guess it just had to be that way. And she said, yes, it just had to be that way.
Oh,
That was it. That was it. That's what we got from a whole lifetime. And it was worth it. It was worth it.
it's so pure,
Yes.
so
That's
pure,
exactly the word.
clear. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All the rest was just muddy and
Yeah.
awful. But that was pure. That's the perfect word. So, yeah, one of my favorite quotes is from R.D. Laing, who was this brilliant Scottish psychiatrist. And he said, he was also very odd, but he was brilliant. And one of the things he said, which I just love, is that there is a great deal of pain in life. And perhaps the only pain that can be avoided is the pain that comes from trying to avoid pain.
Mm.
Yeah. And yet,
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we don't even really feel like we have a choice. Like your mother ran away from who she was. She divided herself into two, the person she'd been once that she rejected, and then this new creation that she had to pretend to be. That's hard work. That's not really who you are or who you were. And that was the best she could do for a very long time. And that gift of age where we begin to say, oh, so what? So what?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter anymore. Like you said, I don't have to have the neighbor's good approval and opinion. I'm not raising little children anymore, and it's going to affect them. I have a freedom I didn't used to have to just,
Freedom.
this is who I am. Yeah, that's one of the great gifts of getting older is freedom.
Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
don't have freedom from pain like we used to. Often we have a lot more pain physically, but some of the emotional pain just goes away. It's like, so what? So what? So
I wonder if I could have understood this at an earlier age. I do think there's something to becoming older that releases you, as you were just saying, Robin, from all those constraints. And again, I kept checking with my mom saying, are you sure you want me to write this down? And she was like, yes, people need to know. And it was like her final gift saying, tell this story. And I think we tend to tell these stories by talking with each other, sharing little snippets. I was able to put it between the covers of a book. It touches on aging and aging well.
yeah, say more about that, Grace. Aging well. How would you describe that? How would you define aging well?
Well, I'm still working on it, Robin.
Well,
I'm, I'm
tell us
still
about the
learning.
struggle.
So maybe that's the answer as we're aging, to accept the fact that we're still learning. It's not this end of a timeline where you think, okay, the cliff is getting closer, and I'm going to get sick and die and fall off of it pretty soon. Instead, it's almost like I don't know. Okay, the feeling is more like the day after Christmas, where all the excitement and the hard work and everything is over, and you can just relax. You know, I find that some of the things that I put upon myself, I think of my mom, and I'm like, yeah, mom, she used to do that. Make it harder for herself than she actually had to, and it just took time to do that. So I don't know. I feel like if I just keep learning, um, I may come to a peaceful end, as she did, a final release. But in the years ahead of my death, I do feel that I'm calmer. I'm learning lessons in my older years that I didn't understand. I was an RN for 52 years. I don't think I ever really understood the pain of sciatica getting out of bed in the morning, you know, um, or certain limitations where, you just want to go out and join your friends for a day at wherever, the beach, and all of a sudden you have to think, well, it's going to take an hour drive to get there. We're going to spend 2 hours. They want to go out for dinner or something afterwards. Then I'm going to have to drive all the way. All of a sudden, some of the activities that we take for granted in even 10 years ago change, and nothing stays the same. So it's a matter of just looking at the here and now and saying, okay, this is what I'm dealing with now, and not get too anxious about what's ahead or sad about what could be a loss. I often think, okay, with arthritis, maybe I'm not playing as violin as well as I did before, but I can teach it, you know. So and with writing, this book was 400 and some pages. That was a lot of typing at a keyboard. I found out that I can dictate a lot of my text and then just do some fine editing with my fingers. So looking at each loss that comes by, because they come by quickly as you get older. All of a sudden you can't do something, or you find out you tripped and fell because you were rushing. It just helps you um, take inventory and stay in the here and now and just keep learning as long as you're here.
Grace, your mother did something that she took a path in her later years that not everybody is able to take. She stopped shoring up the image she wanted to have other people have of her and began to reveal who she really was, and asked you to come in and help facilitate that, which is a very big shift, because sometimes people choose right to the end to keep shoring up that image.
Yeah.
And it may be very hollow. It may not have even been that rewarding, but it's the image, it's shoring up something that doesn't even exist. And to come home to ourselves, to embrace who we really are, what we've really been and what we are now. There is, again, a tremendous freedom in that. And I find that so admirable in your mother. And I really admire your way of talking about it too. So Grace, we're going to end today. I want to know if there's something that you want to say to our audience about what you've been talking about anything else. What's your last thing in this podcast to say to all of us?
I like the way you picked out my 2 words, Robin. Age well. Age well. It's a gift. It's a grace. It's a gift, and make the most of it to the best of your ability. You can have bad days and good days, but age well to the best of your ability.
I love that. Your name fits you so well, in my opinion. I feel like you just embody grace. And there is a grace in aging, that freedom that we've been talking about. And if we concentrate on what we're losing or what we've already lost, because a lot of things that we lose, we're not going to get back. Okay, all right, that's got to be okay. But those gifts that come with aging, that big oh well, that big so what, that reminder that nothing stays the same all through life. And
Amen.
to back up, I was just thinking about what you were talking about, the stages of life, that self-consciousness that we have and wanting to look good. It's the worst when we're the best. When we're in our teens, we look so wonderful, and we are so ashamed of any flaw that we perceive in ourselves, and so afraid of what everyone else thinks of us. And as time goes by, that does soften and soften and soften, usually. Great, great, great gift to just come home to ourselves. So, Grace, thank you so much for being my guest. I want to recommend this book to anyone who wants to read about a lot of courage, a lot of struggle, and a lot of victory, a lot of victory. So thank you all for being with us. And again, Grace, thank you so much.
I appreciate you, Robin, and your listeners.
It's mutual. Okay, everybody. Bye-bye. Great news, everybody. Our premier hair care product line, Sensationally Silver, is now available on Amazon. You can order it so easily, you can get it so quickly, and you can be so sensationally silver.
Sensationally silver, because you are.